Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Go ahead and put on your geopolitical analyst hats, because today we're unpacking one of the most volatile and complex situations unfolding across the globe right now, the escalating crisis between the United States and Iran. Look, the Middle East right now, it's like an incredibly entangled web of kinetic military action, tight economic blockades, and seriously high-stakes diplomacy. So what I'm going to give you today is a highly structured, strictly data-driven look at the entire chessboard. Now, we're absolutely not here to pick sides. Our goal is just to decode the strategies, the leverage, and the facts reported on the ground so you can actually understand what the heck is happening. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover conflicting global security claims, high-stakes military hardware losses, the Sledge Hammer tactic, China's diplomatic balancing act, the Taiwan leverage factor, and finally, the Hormuz choke point. Starting off with Section 1, Conflicting Global Security Claims, the War of Narratives. So before we can even begin to understand the physical conflict on the ground, we have to look at the completely contradictory narratives driving it. I mean, they are night and day. On one side, you've got Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confidently claiming that Israel has largely dismantled Iran's axis of evil and successfully neutralized the threat of an Iranian nuclear bomb. He's framing their military operations as necessary, defensive nuclear deterrence. And this is a security posture heavily backed by the United States, who definitely view Iran as a primary destabilizer in the region. But then you flip to the exact opposite side of the chessboard. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi asserts that these attacks are completely unjustified. He says they're based on false claims that actually contradict international atomic energy assessments, and he frames Iran as the victim of illegal expansionism here. As you can see, when you put these competing viewpoints side by side, there is absolutely no middle ground. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this baseline lack of trust actually impacts real-world diplomacy. Remember those recent peace talks between the US and Iran and Pakistan? Well, they completely failed. And as Foreign Minister Araghchi explicitly stated right here, we have no trust to Americans. This is the main obstacle in the way of any diplomatic effort. When neither side trusts the other's basic security claims, well, negotiations are going to hit a rapid and very hard dead end. All right, moving on to Section 2, high-stakes military hardware losses by the numbers. With diplomacy officially stalled out, we've got to transition to the actual kinetic conflict on the ground. And guys, the reported physical costs over the last several weeks have been surprisingly high. 39. That is a massive data point in this conflict. According to data revealed by U.S. Democratic Senator Eddie Gess, 39 U.S. military aircraft were reported completely destroyed in the span of just a few weeks, specifically between February 28th and April 7th. Plus, another 10 experienced various degrees of damage. To put that into perspective, losing this volume of aircraft severely diminishes regional air superiority, it delays critical intelligence gathering, and it throws a massive wrench into ongoing U.S. operations. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what kind of tech we're talking about here. We aren't just looking at basic equipment, we're talking about highly advanced, extremely expensive technology. The destroyed hardware includes F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters, F-15 jets, Thunderbolts, and U.S. military drones. But if we're neutrally looking at the data from the Senate report, the absolute most surprising element is the reported perpetrator, the Iraqi military. It was reported that the Iraqi military was actually responsible for shooting down this high-tech U.S. hardware during the outbreak of the conflict. I mean, that is a profound tactical hurdle for U.S. forces in the region right now. Which brings us to Section 3, the Sledge Hammer tactic, loopholes and renaming. So, in response to these serious military hurdles and those failed peace talks in Pakistan, Washington is reportedly preparing a brand new operation. But before we get into that, you might be wondering, what is the War Powers Act? Simply put, this is a U.S. law that strictly limits the president's ability to wage war against a foreign nation to just 60 days, unless they get explicit approval from Congress. Okay? So this ticking 60-day clock is absolutely crucial context for the tactical pivot we're currently seeing over at the Pentagon. Because peace talks failed, the U.S. obviously wants to keep military pressure on Iran. But here's the catch. The clock was running out on their initial offensive, which was known as Operation Epic Fury. So officials reportedly initiated a strategic loophole, Step 1, conclude Operation Epic Fury. They officially ended it in early May. Step 2, launch Sledge Hammer. Basically, they take the exact same military objectives and repackage them under a shiny new name. Step 3, by doing this, officials believe they can legally bypass that 60-day limit set by the War Powers Act, allowing them to extend the offensive. Now, tactically speaking, Sledge Hammer aims to maintain relentless, unbroken aerial pressure on Iranian proxy sites to essentially force a surrender. though, its actual effectiveness remains highly questionable given those massive hardware losses we just walked through.
Let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, China's Diplomatic Balancing Act. The Beijing Summit.
Shifting from military tactics to global diplomacy, we really need to talk about the recent May 15th meeting in Beijing between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Because China's role here, it's absolutely pivotal. The U.S. is actively attempting to leverage China's massive economic interest to tip the scales. So the crucial point is exactly what U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said here. The Chinese have ships stuck in the Persian Gulf. It's in their interest to resolve this. Basically, the U.S. strategy is to lean hard on that economic disruption, pressing China to use its global influence to force Iran to the negotiating table. And why should you care about this? Well, stuck commercial ships mean disrupted global supply chains, and that inevitably means higher prices for all of us at the local store.
But China's response so far? It's been an incredibly cautious balancing act. Instead of taking direct military sides or openly condemning Iran like the U.S. requested, President Xi Jinping publicly pushed for broad cooperation. He basically asserted to Trump that the international community wants the U.S. and China to act as global partners, not rivals. So Beijing is very much emphasizing stability and economics over any kind of aggressive intervention.
Next up is Section 5, the Taiwan leverage factor, the diplomatic friction.
Look, you literally cannot talk about U.S. and China cooperation in the Middle East without pivoting to the massive elephant in the room, the major diplomatic condition complicating everything: Taiwan. During the Beijing summit, this was the ultimate diplomatic tightrope. We saw President Xi Jinping issue a very direct warning, laying down the demand that Taiwan must be handled carefully to avoid massive friction between the two superpowers. In response to that, Secretary of State Marco Rubio held the line, pointing out that the U.S. position remains entirely unchanged. They are sticking with strategic ambiguity. So it's this tense stance, right? The U.S. desperately wants China's help with Iran, but China is using this exact moment to signal that their help comes with some very real expectations regarding Taiwan.
And finally, we arrive at Section 6, the Hormuz choke point, a blockaded future. Let's move to and see how this builds, because this diplomatic stalemate directly impacts one of the most important trade routes on the entire planet. Let's map out this rapid timeline of escalation. Okay, so February 28th, Operation Epic Fury begins against Iran. Fast forward to April 7th, and those heavy U.S. aircraft losses we discussed finally come to an end. Then, on May 5th, Epic Fury is officially halted. And literally the very next day, May 6th, the U.S. pauses Project Freedom, which was their specific military operation to liberate stuck commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz. And interestingly, this sudden tactical pause was actually requested by Pakistan and other nations just to try and create some breathing room for those peace talks with Iran. All of which leaves us with today's incredibly volatile status quo, and frankly, some massive regional stability risks. Yes, active ship liberation under Project Freedom is paused. However, the U.S. military is still maintaining a super strict blockade. Officials actually stated they've essentially built a dome over the Strait of Hormuz. And what's Iran's response? Well, in direct response to this ongoing blockade, Iran's Revolutionary Guard has been conducting extensive 5-day military drills right in Tehran, specifically practicing drone strikes against U.S. helicopter targets. So while things might look paused on paper, on the ground, it is a highly militarized, deeply tense standoff.
Which leaves us right here, staring at this giant geopolitical chessboard. With ships literally stuck in the water, diplomatic trust entirely broken, and a U.S. legal loophole paving the way for Operation Sledge Hammer, we really have to ask ourselves, will the immense economic pressure of a blockaded Hormuz Strait eventually force a diplomatic breakthrough? Or is this tense standoff just the spark for a much broader global crisis? It's the billion-dollar question, and whatever the answer is, it's going to inevitably affect the global economy. It's a situation you're definitely going to want to keep a very close eye on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you all next time.